Okay, hello colleagues. Good morning again, goedemorgen, and welcome back for our panel discussion today with a lineup of very knowledgeable, interesting panellists who I will briefly introduce to you, as well as a bit of scene setting before we go into some questions. So what I have proposed to our panellists and what I propose to you is that we take some moments to capture our observations about the satellite meeting that we've had, have some discussion between the panellists, and then open the floor to all of you to share your reflections and questions with our panellists. So the topic that we will be discussing is what needs to be done to ensure the maximum benefits of open access for readers and researchers throughout the world, and what should IFLA advocate. So it's an opportunity to take stock and also to look forward. We will be here until around about 12:15, so we have plenty of time for discussion. So to begin, just with some introductions. So my name is Fiona Bradley, and I'm part of the IFLA Open Access Working Party, co-leading that together with Susan Riley and other colleagues, including Patrick Kanowski and Ellen Tyers. And our three panellists today, Ilkay Holt is the Scholarly Communications Lead at the British Library, and I believe further details about all of our panellists' bios should be available on the website. Ilkay has a really fascinating work history and experience in the UK, but also in Turkey, working with Turkish National University Library Consortium, also with CORE, Confederation of Open Access Repositories, FAO, Food and Agriculture Organisation, and has been a part of Creative Commons Turkey. Next, we have Jayshree Mamtora, who's from James Cook University in Australia, who is the Scholarly Communications Manager at the library there, and has been heavily involved with the very influential Research Support Community Day, which is an annual event involving colleagues from across the country, and has been very actively involved in IFLA in a number of capacities as a volunteer over the years. And Alan Brine, who is the Deputy Director, Head of Archives and Research Management at De Montfort University in the UK, and he is representing the Continuing Professional Development and Workplace Learning section here at this event. And he has a very broad portfolio indeed, working in areas including learning spaces, resource delivery, study support, heritage, staffing, and has been involved in a number of GIST projects. So please welcome them all. And what we will do just to begin is have a think about what we've heard during this satellite meeting, what has been memorable, unique, and interesting for us to capture and take home to our institutions, but also take forward in our work collectively. So just to begin with a little bit of scene setting, at least for myself, I think I've found this to be a very unique event in terms of focusing on the big picture. It's been quite refreshing to get beyond the practicalities of agreements and licensing terms and these sorts of issues that we so often focus on, and really talk about what are we trying to do, and refocus and reset our thinking around issues like equity, social justice, and solving global goals. That we're really trying to focus on our aspirations and not only the challenges that we face in our own libraries and our own regions. Sabalo really reminded us yesterday that knowledge systems are not neutral, and that there are no inherent moral goodness in what we're doing, but that there really has to be a purpose and a driver behind what we hope to achieve, which was a fantastic way to set the scene for everything we have discussed since then. The regional case studies that looked at the successes but also gaps and opportunities in all the different parts of the world were really fascinating in highlighting what we share in common, and where we can learn from each other, as well as where we need to continue to respect all of our differences. critically, many of the speakers have also highlighted and observed that we're not just talking about the direct outputs in terms of open access, but the need to create a sustainable ecosystem, which includes the infrastructure that underpins what we do, as well as the people. So then the people being the researchers, but also the librarians who support this work, as well as the inclusion of all other stakeholders involved in research assessment, research culture, research production, and the broader public. So, turning from that, we've also heard many different examples of the need to include people from minority and marginalised communities. We've heard about the need for issues like licensing, accessibility, copyright reform. I'll highlight here also some of the things that go in parallel. For example, the Marrakesh Treaty, which was so monumental in supporting people with visual impairments, is also relevant to this work, and the need for strong networks and collaboration. So, with that as the opening scene setting for the huge amount of ideas and information we have heard in the last day and a half, I would now like to invite our panellists to spend some time, a few minutes each, sharing their reflections with each other and with the audience in terms of what has really surprised each of our panellists the most during this meeting, and what were your highlights during your time here? So, would you like to begin, Ilkay?
Okay.
Shouldn't have sat there.
I shouldn't say that. Yeah. First of all, thanks for this opportunity. Actually, it's great to be able to reflect back on yesterday. I realised actually I have taken too much notes from yesterday, so it was difficult to pick on one. But I was particularly, I guess, impressed or fascinating by the way that Sabelo actually described all these barriers in access to knowledge or in the knowledge production as colonial patterns. So I won't go into all the barriers, but I think it just shows us there's something deep in there, and sometimes if you just take ourselves actually out of that situation, there are actually bigger problems within the systems, and we should spend time actually thinking about these things. That was the first, I think, main points that I've taken away. The other thing was I really enjoyed seeing these different overviews and landscape overviews and different countries and regions. I think I always find them actually useful to see what the differences are and who is doing what in that landscape. I guess that also just proves that no one size actually fits all approach, and also another thing to prove that actually we should really work locally with local communities, but still think globally and work together within these communities, because we do have a lot, to learn from each other. I think that was one of the highlights. Another, just relevant to that, actually, from Reisa's comments and presentation yesterday, she did say some of the topics are not actually even on the agenda of some of the countries, which is true. I think that really shows a lot. I think that was two big highlights for me. And the other thing is, all these initiatives are trying to link their actual activities into, how equitable, they can be in their what they actually provide. That's also, I think, a good direction to go. So these were really just three main points for me. If that's
all right. Over to you, Jayshree.
Yep. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, organisers, for inviting us to be on this panel. For me, I would say that the presentations yesterday were more pleasing rather than surprising, in the sense that I was really impressed with the number and the variety of presentations, starting from our keynote with Sabelo, but then going through all the other presentations in the session that I did with Juan Miguel, with our colleague from South Africa and from the US. Basically, we're all saying the same thing. We're all saying that there is an issue here, we're in the same situation, and we need to be working together to be able to get to that end goal that we are heading towards. No matter where you were in the world, the issues were the same. That, cost. Open access is not only about cost. Money is always going to be an issue. The differences between the haves and the have-nots. The situation is the same no matter where you are. My presentation focused on the Pacific Islands, on Australia and New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands, and there in itself you could see the differences between the various nations. So it leaves room for so much more to be done, but my observation as a whole was that we're all on that same wavelength. Different aspects, we looked at different aspects, different angles, and it was wonderful and rich to hear those different viewpoints, but the end story was the same from my point of view.
Fair enough. There's a couple of things. The first thing I want to talk about is the programme committee, because I think when we all got together and we talked about what the call would be, how this would be different to many other webinars, conferences on open access, and I think genuinely it's been a really successful conference. We've had such a wide variety and very different views, outlooks, and aspects of open access. And I think we've managed to hit the nail on the head. And I also think that the call was clearly captured what we were trying to do, because otherwise we wouldn't have got the papers that we got, not just, in terms of content, but in terms of, global reach as well, and having people from across the globe. I would say come and speak, but we've been unlucky in some cases due to border controls and other different things, that we haven't had everybody we wanted here, and to have some wider ongoing conversations. But having said that, it's interesting listening to colleagues here. Yesterday for me was a real roller coaster. There were moments when I was really depressed about where we were with open access, and then desperately thinking, okay, where are we going, and all those different things, because it's clear across the piece, and I do this in my day job, as Fiona says. I've got everything in my portfolio, and open access is one of them. And trying to get the academics just to do open access is challenging, let alone the global complexities of the discussions we're having. And so when I was listening to Sabello yesterday and listening to the complexities of what's underpinning all the difficulties we're having, and colonial structures and everything else, I just thought, how on earth are we going to overcome all of this to genuinely get more than 0.1% of the global population to have better access, But that didn't last long. I went after yesterday. I went straight back to the hotel. Ordered a copy of the works of Francis Bacon to read when I get back. and just because curiosity, we're all curious. That's why we're librarians. It just drove me to think: how on earth did somebody back in the 16th century start talking about knowledge and not predict exactly, but say problems are coming, and so it's all about how do we spread that knowledge. So that there's we've heard many ways, and I'm sure we're going to get into more discussion here about what are the things that we can do, even in our day job, just to make some difference, because it's really hard, but it's been great.
There was one thing that. Had you finished?
Oh, no, you carry on.
There was one thing that surprised me, talking about yesterday, something that Sabello said, and he said something about, he was looking at it from a colonial point of view, and how India was owed 64 trillion US dollars. I certainly hadn't looked at it from that point of view. So that aspect was a novel way of thinking. I mean, it was quite mind-blowing that the extent of that, and clearly he's looked into it in quite some depth. But the end story was, yes, we're all in this situation, and what are we going to do about it? Start speaking. Yeah.
There we go, magic button. So let's stick with the complexities and the roller coaster theme and the emotions and the big structural challenges, but also thinking about what does it mean for us in our daily lives. So I think it is worth unpacking some of those assumptions and being a little bit provocative and thinking about, is open access actually delivering on its promise, which was as Sibello also said and others have also said, came very much from a time earlier in the internet's infancy where we really did have this sense that there would be a liberating effect from this technology, yet we have very much come to see in many parts of the world there's also been a rise of a repressive force in terms of technology. So is open access actually reaching the communities that need it the most? And how would we even know if it is having that reach into communities? Open to anyone to begin that discussion.
I don't think we would be where we are even having this conference if that were the case. Obviously, a lot more work needs to be done. You know, we've been kind of chipping away. But the progress has been quite slow. In a country like ours, Fiona and I both come from Australia. Yes, we've made good progress, but it's never enough. But it's the have-nots. You know, there's so much more that needs to be done. Well, I would love to see the day where we no longer are needing to have these conferences, where we've achieved that ideal. But do we see that in sight? You know, in our lifetime?
Not in mine. No. I think the scary thought for me is how long is that road, you know, and what major change will there be that will make things happen? I mean, there are moments, you know, the advent of the internet, you know, possibly even Google, you know, and now we've got AI. Will they make a difference? I mean, to some degree they have, because things are more available than they were before. That doesn't necessarily mean open, but more available. So things have changed. But what's the next change that might make it possible for people to get to stuff they might need? You know, when we talk about, you know, scientific papers, that's a very different thing to grant access to that than it is to grant access to some other things that people might need. You know, just basic stuff to find out. You know, I'm thinking particularly just in the UK. Well, how do people get access to benefits, for example? How easy is that in itself? You know, it's probably, for some it's easier than it used to be. It may depend upon your age and access to digital and what you can do in those different things. There's a whole raft of different things that impact on open access. You know, scientific papers is another big thing. You know, but that requires a different kind of change. You know.
My addition would be I wanted to actually start with some kind of positives. I know the progress actually has been very, very slow, and I was looking at, you know, some kind of numbers in some part of the world for some of the research outputs, like accessing to funded research, for instance. European Commission, you know, published this report, and they said 83% of our publications are now open access. We reached and we achieved quite a lot. So that is the good indication in a way, right? But I guess going back to the question, the answer is clearly no. It didn't really deliver what it promised right at the beginning, because even EC, or I don't remember, but someone actually, or some organization aimed for 100% by whatever. So we're just talking about just numbers, and it doesn't really tell us much. Going back to my personal history and about all this, what's really happening and why it is slow kind of thinking. At least for the last 3 decades, let's take like 2000s, 2010s, and then 2020s. I know we are only in the 23, but my feeling, or at least in my observation, has been in the first 10 year we have always been talking about just making these funded research available and open access. Okay, that took us for many years, and we are still discussing, and geographically in different places we are still trying to explain this to each other and also to researchers, to readers, right? But at least I feel like that first decade we spent a lot of time on that, and then the second decade, if we call them decades, whatever, in the second period we did spend a lot of time around principles. We are opening all these things, but actually look, all these new repositories are popping up, but we need to talk about the principles, right? Then, for instance, the latest was, at least we are dealing with fairness, making things in fairizing stuff, and talking about the care principles. So we're trying to stick to those principles, to do the right things. We're trying to learn from good practices. So I feel like now where we come to, it's not the first time we're talking about these things, but at least we are now more worried about these, the ethical issues. Yes, we did actually all the right things, technically, at least around principles. We have been trying to speak to each other, at the systems level and on the web, and etc. But actually, things are not going well. We're not really talking to the communities, to the real people, to the readers. So this is the time to talk about, do we actually do things responsibly, right? So I feel like for human being, it takes time to, and also within the systems and institutionalized lives of ours, everything takes time. So in that sense, I want to be a bit more hopeful and positive in a way, but also to do something at a global scale, that's not easy, and that's going to take time. But I hope we know, or at least we are trying to learn more about what to watch out, and under all these new systems and the practices.
So picking up on that sort of evolution in approach, moving away from the technocratic, let's just put in place the tools to make access happen, broadening out to a more ethical, principled approach, and then looking at some of the other things that have happened in terms of politics, disruptive change and things like that. I think it is worth also, something I didn't prepare in advance, is really this question of this movement has been a very long one. Absolutely. 2 decades or more in the making. And yet then we see how things can come along very, very quickly and completely disrupt and change our way of thinking. For example, the rise of generative AI and the impact that might have on access to information and open access and things like that. So within this movement and working with our stakeholders, is there anything we can do to reflect, to be better prepared, to take on these disruptive challenges when they happen, or do we just have to respond after the fact and try and, in English we have a saying where, you kind of close the door after the horse is already gone. It feels a little bit like that with AI. Is there anything else we can do to change this?
I just want to say no, but that's not very helpful, is it? I think as with all these things, when something genuinely comes out of the blue, it shouldn't do, because how many years have people been working on that? Many. So it shouldn't come out of the blue. But it's that moment, I think, when somebody manages to take that original blue sky thinking and make a practical use of it. Largely exam cheating, I think, was probably the key thing. But the thing I think that we have to think about is it is about, sadly, it is about reacting, but it's about trying to guide and help and support and kind of, don't know if I should use this, but use it for good. Because we've straight away where I'm working, we've straight away, well, there's no good battening down the hatches and saying, no, don't use AI. You can't use that in your work. So literally within weeks, we've created guides for students and saying how to use this to best effect and not to fall into certain traps. Like for example, some of the when ChatGPT was coming out, it's using data from a while back. The free version is, So you've immediately got to get people to think about analysing the data, stuff we already tell the students to do, but it's about reminding them about those skills and to be constantly using them and being aware as you go forward.
And then the issue there, to get more up-to-date content, you need to have bugs. You need to be able to subscribe to the latest version.
Another barrier.
So there's a barrier there already.
I guess my fixing or reflection to what happened. Sorry, did you finish? Did I?
No, go ahead. I'll jump in whenever. That's okay.
Do later. So I think kind of reflection. I think what we should, at least some of us should have learned by now that some of the solutions that we brought to this landscape didn't work and created more problems. So we should just see that clearly. Things like, today yesterday we were just trying to make a clarification. Look, open access is not just about scholarly publishing. Let's talk about beyond that. There's, beyond peer review or, beyond, at least, traditional publishing, there's more to that. So basically, I said this to a couple of you, I think, in the break times, like, trying to fixing the same thing. Or I think, there has been a really nice blog post recently, again, written by Invest in Open, Caitlin, and she was, saying, for instance, recalibrating, what we're already doing actually doesn't solve the problem. I think it also doesn't solve the problem of equity that we have been trying to talk here. So instead of just fixing, the bits and pieces, within the same system, we are trying to be a bit more, is it risk averse, the right word? So we need to do more around the experimental things. We need to be out there and pioneering some of these things if we can and if we are able to, so that actually if it works, the others can learn. So I think this should be like how we behave and how we approach these new initiatives and infrastructures. That should be, I think, one thing. The other thing that reminded me, there's no AI, it's coming, we know it's coming. And also, all this great technology, and sometimes we are really trying to, create these, fancy models, or I say fancy just because I couldn't find the right word, but fancy models or fancy, systems. But we know that it's not always accessible. Like we talk, even the basic, PDFs or, spreadsheets, for instance, that struck me this morning, how I was actually doing things wrongly. I will just go back to my recent experience in Open Repositories Conference back in June. The closing keynote, for instance, it was perfect because the simple message was, keep everything simple. You're just bringing this technology for us all, to adopt. But actually it doesn't work, so keep it simple when you're actually developing these systems. I think someone already said this, even this morning. I think that's always also the line and the reflection that we need to be doing when looking back to these 20-something or 30 years.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm sorry I mentioned AI now.
Coming.
It was coming, yeah. No, I was just thinking about, because of the presentation we had this morning, that my university does UDL, Universal Design for Learning, and there are basic things, trying to keep it simple, because we appreciate that there's a lot you can do, but when you've got a lot of academics, you need to go, right, this, and this, so that at least you've got a kind of like, if you can do more, that's fantastic, but you've got to keep it, as at a simple level as you can, just so people can go, right, okay, I've got to prepare this course, maybe that course as well, so I can do this, and this. And we just tell them it's about the resources that you get from the library. It's about what assessments you make and how different they are, so that all the different types of users can do it. We actually have around 20% of our student cohort is is disabled. You know, so that's part of the reason we have UDL to do that. But I'm still thinking, because my team are responsible for some aspects of accessibility, so I'm going to go and check. I'm pretty sure they do, but I'm going to go check. Do you do this, this, and this? I'm just checking. So it's reminded me anyway. So, but yeah, so I just wanted to jump in with that.
And I think it's really interesting to reflect on some of those things, which are so critical to how people can really make use of and reuse knowledge and information in their own work and their own lives to improve everything that they're doing. And sort of in a way thinking about how do we get beyond this kind of the burden of the thinking of it being a burden, that should just be part of the research process, and the way that people work is to think simply, openly, in a way that can be reproducible. So whether that's from the outset of a project, even when people are planning their project, how will they communicate the results at the end in a way that is inclusive and accessible? So I'm curious to hear if you have any thoughts about that in terms of publications, but also other types of outputs that many speakers spoke about in terms of, data or even at my institution, many of our researchers produce 3D models, films, reports, many other types of works that go well beyond text.
Shall I just start with whatever comes to my mind, Anthony, in the first place around this? I hope I got this right, but in terms of diversity, diverse outputs, and that also I think comes with roles. At least I can say some stories from UK, and Ellen, you can help me, please. But for instance, all the things that we are assessing, also going back to research assessment this morning. We are very much focused still on the traditional publications. That also defines what we do institutionally, right? That defines on what we try to preserve, what we try to make it accessible. But there's so much beyond that, especially, I come from a cultural heritage institution, National Library, so it works completely differently. And we are trying to look beyond, these journal articles, and books, our monographs are a very heavy part of our collections, but we do try to look beyond these traditional outputs. So going back to my UK example, for instance, there's it's not new. I think it already has been done for one period, but there's some initiative called Hidden Ref. Basically, I'm not the right person to describe this to you, but Hidden Ref is something something about celebrating all outputs, all research types and outputs, and also the roles, because we did talk about yesterday, how librarians are actually enabling librarians on other roles within the institutions, how we are actually enabling that research process, and it's not always the one just publishing their articles. So there are actually more layers, and there are more stakeholders. There are different roles and activities going on around this research process. So we should look at it as a whole thing from A to Z. So it's not only just the outputs. So I just wanted to mention that because Hidden Ref is a great example, just the challenging the national research excellence, framework within the country, I think, because that is also creating awareness between the researchers and the librarians like us. Also, it gives us a community and network to talk about these problems.
I'll jump in there.
Please.
Yes. My institution is largely a creative institution. So we have dance and we have art and yes, we have business as well, but that's easy to surface. We have a repository, put your papers in there. But actually, the ref is a problem for us, because what do we do with all those different outputs? Whether it's a ceramic vase or all of those things. How do you do that? And the honest truth is, how can I say this? You mangle some of the systems you have to be able to make them available, and to make them available openly is even harder, because, for example, we use something called Figshare. to make data accessible and things like that. And we have mangled that to enable access to some of these other outputs. So there is a way to go in being able to use things to make things available. I think I'll have to stop there. There's more, but it's not coming yet.
Well, jump in when it does.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, so you both work in the same country, and these are some of the issues that we are involved with day to day as part of my job, and to some extent Fiona's. Helping academics who are concerned with promotion, with national research assessments, but fortunately ours was shelved mid-process. Because we were concerned about what we call NTROs, non-traditional research outputs, and how we're going to deal with them. And we have two different repositories. We have one for research and the other one for data. And they both used to come under the library, but in the last restructure, data moved out to e-research. But we still need to work very closely together. So these are day-to-day issues. However, we need to be thinking beyond that, in the roles that we are in at the moment. Creating much more awareness. And yes, we do lots of training and workshops on our read and publish agreements, how we, these are part of our subscriptions, and how you can save on the article processing charge. But we're still thinking at this level. Doing this research that I did on the Pacific Islands, when I lived in the Pacific Islands, it was quite a few years ago, I wasn't working in this open access area. But now I'm finding that I'm thinking at a much more in-depth level as to what we could be doing. I remember that my university has a twinning arrangement with the University of Papua New Guinea. And it's at that level, but why can't we include our open access support as part of that? And I discovered that Fiji National University has an agreement with Monash University. And so on, so we already have these kind of arrangements. Why don't we broaden them and do much more to support our colleagues and our neighbours? And it can be done, and it's really got me thinking much more, even though the awareness was always there. And I still talk to colleagues in the Pacific Island countries from the time that I lived and worked there, only for a short period of time. Nevertheless, the interest still remains. And I would love to be able to do much more, to some extent within my own day-to-day role, if I can somehow add it on and try and provide that support. But then, of course, when we finally come to it, through the big IFLA hat, but I'll wait till you come to that part before I talk about what we could do from that point of view.
So we will just sort of have a little bit more discussion about challenging assumptions, and then we'll go on to what we should do next. But I'm really struck by that example of the hidden ref and that way of recognising the role of libraries in supporting the research process, which happens to different extents in different countries. Sometimes it's on a project-by-project basis. Other times it's through partnerships across the campus to deliver different services. But it just really struck me as something that is oftentimes very much needed to be able to demonstrate the value that libraries provide as part of this process. We're not just there to, tick the box about who will pay the bill, but it's genuinely part of research production and knowledge production, which has always been the library's historic role, really looking after the scholarly records. So that's a fascinating one. I'm going to have a look at more details on that. So just to sort of bring to a close this part of our discussion is really, should we try to, given how long it's taken us to get to this point in time, should we try to achieve open access at any cost? Now, cost being financial or political or otherwise, what does that mean? And after open, if we get there, if we get to the 100%, of whatever it is that we've defined in the metrics that we think count as open, what's next?
Yes, but no.
Yes, but no. Yes, but no. I was thinking, just as you were talking, because of everything we've just been talking about, and about how libraries quite often, we say we support the research process, but quite often we're pushing it as well. You know, I mean, I don't know about other places, but how many places did the library go, we need to have a repository to capture this stuff, before the institution decided we need to have a repository to capture this stuff, before even the ref asked for it. You know, so it's interesting how I think sometimes libraries are slightly ahead of the curve, you know, and it takes a little while for people to listen, to understand. Having said that, that then takes me to cost, you know, because I've just talked about fixed share, comes with the cost, which we had to convince the university to take on board. Repositories, there's a cost there, even if it's an open repository, you've still usually got a person that needs to look after it. So there's all these different things, and we've recently, I use the word recently loosely, started a university press. That's not free either, even though the stuff we have in it is free to access. That's not free to put together, you know. And I quite often don't shout about that at the institution, because then more people will come and ask, and the more people that come and ask, the more it's going to cost. Yeah, and you know, and the library's budget is finite. You know, we can do so much, but until the institution goes, aha, that's a good vehicle, we can use that for early career researchers, or we can use it to make a difference in the public, because we have something called a civic partnership with the city we're in, you know, and we're trying to help the city work with us, which to make things more open and accessible to people in that area. But it's not easy, because there's always a cost.
Yeah, there's always a cost for anything. But I was just thinking, like, you know, I guess the problem is, you know, if we see the open access as an end goal, so we're trying to achieve that. So I guess that shouldn't be the end goal. So that sometimes there are things, going back to, you know, a different issue, but sometimes there are things actually, you know, they shouldn't be open, or, you know, it's all about like how we actually keep them, how we store them, how to preserve them. So open access, when it is not the actual end goal, I think that's just, you know, the bit better, you know, approach to that, you know, question. That's how I felt. That's why I wanted to just say that. But apart from that, the short answer is definitely yes, no. Yes, but no. No, it shouldn't come at any cost, because I think, you know, at least, again, maybe not globally, but in some part of the world, so we are very much aware of that, you know, everything should be done responsibly. It's about, like, you know, how we live our daily lives to how we actually share our, you know, resources, right? You know, we are all trying to be, you know, responsible in a better way. We're all trying to actually practice the good things, so that we are trying to learn from those stuff. So that's why this equity, you know, ethics, and the necessary regulations and the policies are in the way that, you know, open access at any cost. So it's not at any cost, really. So we should be really questioning those things. I think I will just also go back to my things, like in how we try to fix things is also important. Maybe another thing is, like, the technology is not. I know it costs a lot, and also to maintain them and everything, but technology is not the main thing. So our decisions should not be through those things, and we should be thinking about more of the system and the human being actually around this in that landscape, if that makes sense. So anyway, it was just a.
So just coming back to my yes but no response, you know, we all accept that open access serves social justice, that it's transformational. But there are so many other issues to be considered. One in Australia is we're very aware of Indigenous cultural protocols, and, you know, and being them. And I mentioned, for those of you that were at my presentation yesterday, the National Health and Medical Research Council open access policy immediately made available open access, but they accept that in the case of Indigenous research, a restrictive license may be applied. So there will be instances where you need to have those restrictions. And talking about technology, there were 3 examples in the Pacific Islands in my presentation: Fiji, Samoa, and Papua New Guinea. Fiji has the best ICT infrastructure. Papua New Guinea, which is a huge country, has the worst. I mean, there's bandwidth issues, basic bandwidth issues. How can we help them? It's such a, that sort of very kind of basic issue. How can we help and support them? So yes, but no.
So let's turn now to thinking about the way forward. So lots of thoughts and inputs and interventions about where many of the challenges remain, but also some of the successes and achievements that have been made in our respective countries. So thinking together about what we can do now going forward, either in our own institutions or working together as collaborators. And just thinking very practically, when you go back to your workplace after this event, what's one idea that you plan to share with your leadership after this meeting?
I'd love to explore that twinning idea that I mentioned. I hadn't thought about that aspect because that's arranged by another part of the university. But how easily can we plug into that? I know our research office works very closely with HDR students in Papua New Guinea, provides support to them. Can we plug into that? That would be a much easier way to do it. So yes, the awareness is there, but just trying to think a bit more about how we can provide support on the ground. And I'm sure there's a lot that could be done.
Entirely up to you. I was just going to say that's a brilliant, because we've not long twinned with another institution. Slightly nervous about going back to my institution and saying to them, how about we do this? Because they'll likely say, okay, off you go. and I'm kind of like, okay, so yes, but...
Well, I would be happy if my institution say, off you go, but I'm not even sure that, anyway.
They might physically make me go as well, and and it's in a part of the world where that's not so easy.
May I ask why?
Ukraine.
Ukraine. Yes.
So I'm kind of like, but that won't stop me. I shall make the suggestion and see what happens.
Yeah, I guess for me, just I would just, when I go back, I will just tell them that some of the problems that we are actually having, we're not alone in those things. So that's the first thing I should definitely say and take away from this gathering. Because that really helps, because we all think that actually this is our struggle when we are doing things, institutionally. At the moment, for instance, I'm in the process of, updating and expanding our kind of open access policy, and that's not an easy one because I started very ambitious, I must say. So that changes. I don't know which version I'm on right now. But I guess, you are always trying to be, more realistic in terms of, what is achievable. So, yeah, I think, at least with the what doesn't work and what it could work, look, here are the examples sort of approach is my thing after every event almost.
Are there any other examples that you haven't shared yet from your own country, or perhaps colleagues that you've worked with in other parts of the world, that you think would be useful for us to learn more about? So I think one of the other things that's been quite intentional with this event is to go beyond the usual suspects, the same sorts of stories and regions that are very often highlighted in these events, but see where there is innovation and different approaches in other parts of the world. So are there other stories that you think are worth highlighting?
I say a couple of things from at least Turkish perspectives. I'm Turkish, and so obviously up until 2016, I used to work in universities in Turkey. I still closely just watch out what's happening there, especially in the open access world. Even though there are problems in everywhere in the world, of course there are more problems in some part of the world. So about what it can be achievable, you just need to be realistic and obviously watch out those local situations. For instance, in Turkey, there are a very small group of people actually are aware of these things and are trying to implement these good practices. But on the other hand, there's a big barrier. Of course, it's not only in Turkey, but in lots of countries, like there's a language barrier. There's that. Also, being able to mingle and get together, in these events actually are not easy to learn from each other. Sometimes we think that actually, it's out there, we just publish this and that, you can actually reach out to these resources and can benefit, or talk to me, or we can work together. That's not also, just a straightforward practice, really. Languages is one barrier, and sometimes actually just different time zones comes in the way. So I think I don't know the answer. Sometimes we do come up with some instant reactions to things, but we really should be thinking more about how we can involve others, not, as you say, not just the usual suspects, or always the good examples, because hearing the issues and the problems really helps us to at least to see what's coming in the future and how we can approach those things. This is just the one thing that came to my mind, just to share from another geography at least.
So if we want to continue some form of dialogue at different levels, whether it's locally, but particularly we're at an IFLA meeting, and one of the themes for this satellite meeting is around inclusiveness through openness and looking at global approaches. What are some ways that we can continue that dialogue, acknowledging some of the very practical challenges that exist? And what role should IFLA and all the other stakeholders involved in the ecosystem play in helping to achieve a more inclusive, equitable, open access future?
I think IFLA, I would love to see IFLA explore some options for partnerships, and I don't know what is possible or not possible, at the base level, but I would love to see them with that kind of international, organisation that they are, and the contacts and the many members that they have from all over the world. I'd love to see them explore ways of collaboration amongst the different members. So you have so many institutions in the developed world who would be ready and able to provide support of one kind or another to the many other institutional members from the developing part of the world. One of the things I knew about IFL, but I didn't really know the details. So IFL is the Electronic Information for Libraries organization, and I was completely bowled over by the work that they do. And that there was a small university in Fiji that had set up this agreement with them, and the rest of the Pacific Islands, of which there are many, had no clue what it was and how little it would take to be able to participate. So I would love it if IFLA were to look at exploring maybe some kind of membership of IFL to help those developing nations, those small island countries that we are close to, but also many others in the Caribbean and other countries in Asia, like Bangladesh and Myanmar, countries that would really appreciate the support. Perhaps look into some kind of twinning arrangements. We've been able to do them, establish them within our own region, but IFLA doesn't have to say, okay, we will do this ourselves. They work with members and see what can be organised amongst them, and get the larger institutional members who have the capacity to make the suggestions and think of ways to take it forward.
Yeah, I think just thinking as you were speaking then about thinking about how, let me get this right, how open can IFLA be? It's not easy, because we were talking heard yesterday about the journal and things like that. It's, there are barriers to some of this stuff, but how open can IFLA be in terms of information and things like that? That might help and make connections, especially as I was just thinking about the SDGs and knowledge and all of those kind of things. So it's front and centre there, and it may be that there is. I know the working party will be presenting during this week and things like that, and maybe there's a standalone theme that brings a lot of things together that could be taken forward with IFLA's work, because you've got accessibility, openness. There's a whole raft of things, as we've heard over the last day and a half.
Yeah, I was going to say the mutual ground would be like SDGs or UNESCO recommendations. There's a lot to be there for IFLA. I think there's a lot of opportunity, because it's a huge organisation. I have always been following things, but I haven't been really active actually in any of the groups. So excuse me if I say anything wrong. But what I see is that the IFLA can work, maybe closely actually with local communities, or whoever actually is the leading organisation or initiative at the local geographical location. But in terms of working with other players and collaboration, I think there are already initiatives and organisations doing these things around open access, like IFL, like COAR, like Spark. I think stronger collaboration with those other initiatives and organisations would definitely help, because obviously we can't expect, and we shouldn't expect, everything from one organisation or one community, but it's all about the community and how we work together. So we all have actually great connections. I think this is also proving really all this event. We all have good connections, so how we can actually work together. One good example, for instance, I don't know, in Africa, there's COA and IFL. They're heavily actually working with WACRAN and UNRAN, so they have been doing a lot of great work. In Latin America, there's already huge, great developments, and there's good collaboration with Europe. I don't know, these things are happening. Maybe we should just look at how they work and get good examples, or take them as an example.
And that's a fantastic point, I think, to turn it over to the audience and to hear your reflections, questions for the panel on any of the topics that we've discussed during this session. So we have a bit of time for your questions and suggestions also. So who would like to begin? Yes.
Thank you. I really appreciate your reflections. I will say, I think I was very struck at the beginning of the conversation when you kept saying, how did you say it? We haven't done enough, right? It hasn't gone far enough, right? And I think all of us need to just take a moment and remember that, one, the publishing industry has been in place for a very long time. It was built and established in a capitalist structure that we all still have to work through, right? And we are working on collective action, which ultimately kind of works against the way that capitalism is structured. And the fight that we're doing, yes, we've been working on this for, 15, 20 years now, but that's a drop in the bucket of time. And if you think about it, right, with the structures of colonialism, with the structures of capitalism in place, we are pushing against deeply entrenched, deeply established structures, and we have made phenomenal progress. And I think all of us need to acknowledge that that this fight is generational, right? This work we're doing is generational. And we cannot expect that we're going to absolutely change everything in the world in the time that it takes us to have a career, right? This is work that's going to take a very long time. And I think we're doing a lot of the right things, and I think we're pushing on a lot of the right buttons, and of course we can do more, and of course we can do better. But I think we all need to just take a moment and acknowledge work we've done is pretty freaking amazing, and we should be really freaking proud of ourselves. So that's that.
I think an important and much needed dose of positivity and realism there. So how would you like to respond?
Well, do you know what? I want to be really provocative. So, not in our lifetime, that's fine. So what's first?
I already said that.
Yes, you already said that. So what comes first? Open access or the end of the world as we know it? It just struck me, and I'm thinking, oh my God, climate change, everything else. Yes, and I think you are actually right. People have done a lot to advance everything. I think it's possibly in our nature to think, how much more can we do? You know, not that everyone in the world thinks like that, but as a community, I think we do. We think, what more can we do for people, for human beings? As Ilkay was saying, it's that kind of, you know, we genuinely want the best for people, you know, and some of us are more privileged than others. So we want more to happen, but the wheels sometimes turn more slowly than we really would wish.
Yeah, I think I answered that question right at the beginning, which was that we're doing a lot in our respective areas, but there's always going to be a lot more needing to be done. You know, can we envisage a time when we aren't having these conferences? We no longer need to have these conversations because we've done it all, we've achieved it all. Certainly not in our lifetimes.
Yeah, I completely agree. Actually, that was a good ending point, and I think my gradual, you know, slow process, but you know, good achievements statement before, so it was just along those lines. So that was great, and I think we should really make most of our, you know, community energy and collective action. So I do agree.
And I think there are some echoes of what you mentioned there, Eva, in the IFLA statement, just sort of highlighting, yes, let's be proud of what we have achieved and then acknowledge there are bigger systemic forces, absolutely. And one of the things that we definitely observed was this nature of crisis, temporal, very temporary changes without really addressing some of those systemic forces that face us as well. So thank you for your intervention. And next comment.
Just want to build on what she had to say about the amazing accomplishments. We've been at this for 2 decades or so, and we continue to evolve, obviously. Continue to push, for guidelines that will help incorporate transformational agreements that incorporate some of these values that we talked about: inclusion, diversity, social justice issues in product reform. I'd just like to plug the work that's going on already and may not seem like we have gone far enough, is that we've inspired movement, and I'm a glass half full kind of girl anyway. I don't want to give up, and I don't want to get depressed by what we still need to do. I want to get excited about what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to jump on the positivity bandwagon. I'm Caroline. I'm CEO of STEM, and I wanted to share a little bit of my personal journey because I've been involved in the open space since 2006. I had left one of the big publishing houses, started the 5th full open access publishing house, and I started running into the guy at Hindawi and PLOS, and the 5 of us that were there, we started WASPA back in the day in 2008. So I was a part of launching that, and I have been to many meetings about open access. I took part in the Budapest Open Access Initiative 10 years, so about 20, 30 of us brought together Peter Suber, Alden Swan, folks were there in the early days thinking about, okay, what's the next 10 years look like? We are so far ahead now than we were 10 years ago when that tenure was, I have to say, and I agree. It was just building the case first for open access. And when we would go to conferences, there weren't that many. There were conferences that were talking about open access, and you would see the same people on the circuit. I met the same people again and again and again. What I like today is I meet a generation that has no idea who I was or who those people were, and that's great because that means we have something that's now become entrenched and is a new mindset. I think what we underestimated, if I look back at what I did, it seemed like such a simple thing, and we used a lot of sound bites, but it's not. Because technology, it sounded like this was this simple thing, or you could just open everything up. But actually, there's a real complexity there. And there's a real complexity there if, with technology, we have this opportunity to meet the needs of different communities and really think about how to tailor things to what's going to be correct for that community, for how to use things. And I think that is why I really appreciated this conference, because one of the other things was, at one point we lost our way a bit because it was open for the sake of open, right? But if we were to make all of the literature tomorrow open on climate change, I promise you we wouldn't solve the climate crisis. We all know that, right? So there's something more there. And I really took a lot, particularly from the talks today, some practical things too about, oh, gosh, we haven't even, open is one thing, but accessibility, you know, I need to do something. I lead publishers, I need to bring them together and to work on that. And pull some good examples from Elsevier, for example. So I really appreciated that. The other thing I just wanted to bring up was it was around cost, because I go to conferences now and I hear, if I'm listening to leadership at universities, funders, it's almost like they've got these buckets. And they keep saying, so librarians and libraries need to also do this, and publishers also need to do this, and now we need to do this, and we need to do that, and we need to do this. And so your bucket and our bucket is getting more and more full. And at the same time, I know when I talk to librarians, in most parts of the world, in most countries, your budgets are shrinking. And I just wonder, with all of these extra expectations, you're expected to now build a library press, you were saying, Alan, that costs money, it does. There's no invoice, but just because there was an invoice doesn't mean it didn't cost. And I think there's a lot of that. And so I also just sit here thinking, how might we advocate for recognizing that value that libraries are delivering and that extra cost that you actually have, that there are some real costs there. And just finally, yeah, I just want to say, I think there is a complexity today, and that's what makes it challenging, because as you all come together and you see that it's different in different countries, that is the challenge that publishers, the international publishers, are facing. If you are just a French publisher in France, publishing in France, you're dealing with one main area. But this is where everything comes together, and it's why it's difficult with that transformation, even where there is a real drive to do so, because there is a generational shift, but also the publishing houses. If you look at the leadership of publishing houses today, it's not what it was 10 years ago. So I just want to say that we are looking to make that commitment together with IFLA, and I see many things where we share. So we all are in this together, and we've got to keep going. So yeah, there's complexities, there's challenges. I think we can address them, but we have come a long way. So thank you so much for saying that.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for the consideration of gone the very long way concerning the openness. My concern now with this great initiative of openness, which is moving forward, is the issues of revolving developments in our societies, where the issues of data science is taking the space. It kind of creates confusion now along the process. As an open access stakeholders, where do we are in terms of data science? Is it data science on top of us, or open access is on top, or they go into parallel, or where do we are? Because I can often see now some of the institutions, they are trying to develop the policies in relation to data science, whereas the open access policies are there. But if you see all this data, it's openly managed. Is it part of data science? How do we, as the IFLA organization, look into that matter? Do we treat it, continue to treat it separately, or we try to find the possible ways of inclusivity, I think, along the process? Institutions now, we are fighting for open access. At the same time, institutions are talking about the issues of commercialization. You see, where are we going? How? Because this data, institutional data, we've been fighting so that it can be openly accessed. You know, it looks like now we're going to take another directions, or I don't know, I think maybe we should look into this terminology, try to be able to position ourselves in a broader spectrum, in a way. Thank you.
So I guess that brings us to, we might have time for one more comment after this one, but I think that question about the future of research communication and how we're dealing with that. I mean, my institution, for example, we work very closely with data scientists because we include data publishing within our open access agreement, and we have a research data librarian that can go out to different faculties and work with preparing for publication of data. But that's not the case in every institution. It is very different in every institution, perhaps more diverse than the way that many of us have approached open access to publications, because that was so closely associated with libraries' traditional roles. So I'm very interested to hear perhaps some closing remarks, thoughts about this future more broadly about research communication.
I was thinking a couple of things there with the comments that we've been having, and I was thinking about the complexity, because it struck me that maybe we just keep putting layers on layers and layers to try and like that, and yet we've been talking about keeping it simple. You know, so that there's some kind of a lesson or message in there for us to think about. But the other thing that struck me with the last comment there was there's a thing about skills as well, and I was thinking about, particularly in my institution, there's a skills deficit in making some of that work and happen in terms of you know, data sets and, you know, and accessibility and usage and that commercialisation. We've got a bit of an academic market with institutions in the UK. They try not to do that, but government policy makes us do that to a degree. It doesn't mean we don't work together, but it does make it harder. But that picture means that we have to be a little bit clever about how we do things, you know, and how we go, we'll argue it like that so we can do it like that. So that enables us to do something, you know, either to convince the institution that it's a thing to do, or more broadly, you know, to reach out more widely.
I was going to say that, you know, skills deficit is definitely there, and we feel that more and more, and we feel like, obviously we need to be prepared for everything. So yeah, I just completely agree with that. And in terms of that, taxonomy terminology and the complexity around it, I guess when we're asked these questions or in a training or something, the first thing that we do is just going to this famous mushroom analogy. Like, there's open science underneath, there's open research, open access, open source, anything that you want. So we just put underneath just to, basically describe that all of these actually are very much connected and relevant. But it doesn't solve the complexity of the problems because, as you say, different institutions, do it differently, and different departments within the same institutions, or, working, that structurally, it's very difficult, a challenge, I think, for all of us. I just wanted to really say that there's no one way or one answer really to give that. I just wanted to share the thoughts, brought my mind.
Yeah, I agree with those comments as well. And Fiona, what you said about ensuring that you include data as part of your read and publish agreement outreach, that is something we're not doing for the very reason that I explained earlier on, that data and research were all together, but we have two different repositories, one for publication or research outputs, the other one for data, and now they've actually been separated for whatever reason. So it's like, we really need to do this, and we need to be working in both areas together. However, are we stepping on somebody else's toe? Okay, we need to be partnering with them and working much closely together so that, we can do the outreach simultaneously. But still, I think that these are sort of global north kind of considerations. It would be interesting to hear what some global south considerations, priorities may be.
Yes, we've got time for one last comment from Ted.
Sorry, I had to be a short question because I'd like to hear from you. I noted Ilkay said OA is not the end goal, which I think is actually important to acknowledge. So I'd be interested to hear from the three of you. What is the end goal?
I start because I thought, I should have said, when I said that, I guess, there's a culture beyond that. So we need to be talking about the open culture. So I'm coming also from Creative Commons work. So we always talk about the open culture as a whole, because that's a way of, you live life. It's the way of actually you practice your work, the way of actually you put your work out there, for public good. As much as shareable, structured, right? So, but open access is usually and definitely all about the outputs. So we're not always talking about the end goal. So we may be actually working on a research for years when we are still actually struggling in that before the output period. So that's what I wanted to say really. So we need to be talking about the cultural change or the open culture as a whole, but not as an open access as an end goal maybe.
For me, it's just two words, and that's social justice. That's the end goal.
I'll throw in another two words, which you've already said, and that's public good, because that's one of the focuses of my institution, and it's one of the reasons I still work there, because actually it is about that public good, and I can focus on that in my lifetime. Because the bigger goals, but if you can just keep going.
Fantastic, and that's a fantastic point to end on. We've come to the end of our time for this panel, so I'd just like to, as is tradition at all satellite events, I'd like to invite you all to join all of the events coming up throughout the Congress, if you are staying on for the Congress. Of course, the ARL Hot Topics session, which will be fantastic this year. Those of all the partner sponsoring sessions, but also particularly the Open Access Working Party. We will be hosting a session on Monday afternoon looking at some of these.
Monday?
I think so. Well, hang on.
I had Thursday, okay.
It's Monday afternoon is the session on global role in open access.
Yes.
And so you're all warmly invited to come and hear discussions about what we can do together, building on many of the outcomes of these discussions. And yes, many other things to look forward to on the program. But I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking our panellists, Alan, Jayshree and Ilkay. And thanks to all of you for a really wonderful, inspiring, challenging discussion. Thank you.